General Thexandra stood before the holographic display, her scaled fingers dancing across the tactical interface with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a battle. The assembled strike team, a carefully curated collection of the galaxy's finest predators, watched as she zoomed in on a green hell that barely deserved the name Forest. "Gentlemen, and crystalline entities," she began, nodding toward the glowing geometric form of Facet Prime. "Today, we end the human problem once and for all." The Thornwick Forest sprawled across the display like a malignant tumor, its canopy so dense that orbital surveillance couldn't penetrate more than a few meters. Twisted root systems created natural mazes that had swallowed entire survey teams, and the local flora had evolved with what could only be described as a deeply personal grudge against anything that breathed. "Our target," Thexandra continued, highlighting a red dot that pulsed mockingly in the forest's heart, "is one Carter Dane, human male, age 32, specialization in demolitions and what their crude military files euphemistically call creative problem-solving. Histok, the Sauroch tracker whose camouflage abilities made chameleons look like amateur hour, flicked his forked tongue thoughtfully. One human, General, with respect, my hatchlings could handle. Could they? Thexandra's voice carried the edge of someone who'd read the classified reports. This particular human has cost us 6 installations, 2 orbital platforms, and a diplomatic incident that required 3 trade agreements to smooth over. He builds bombs out of fertilizer and household chemicals, then acts surprised when they level city blocks. The insectoid Chitauri swarm leader, Buzzwick, clicked his mandibles in what passed for laughter among his species. Primitive chemistry. Our exoskeletons can withstand plasma charges. What threat could their quaint little explosives possibly? A datapad sailed across the room, bouncing off Buzzwick's compound eyes. The footage that began playing showed a crater where a Chitauri forward base used to exist. The twisted remains of advanced alloy supports scattered like children's toys. That quaint little explosive was made from tree sap, mineral deposits, and what our chemical analysis identified as fermented fruit, Thexandra said dryly. Carter Dane doesn't think like a soldier. He thinks like a very creative, very dangerous child who's been given access to a chemistry set the size of a planet. Facet Prime's crystalline form shifted, light refracting through their geometric body in patterns that indicated deep thought. The human psychological profile suggests unconventional tactical approaches. However, our combined forces represent overwhelming superiority in numbers, technology, and strategic positioning. Exactly. Thexandra smiled, revealing teeth that had evolved for ripping through armor plating. Which is why this will be the last time we have to deal with human creativity. The Thornwick Forest is nature's own prison. Dense canopy blocks their precious orbital support. The root systems will trip up any ground advance, and the local wildlife. She paused to call up footage of something with too many teeth and not nearly enough regard for the natural order. Let's just say the local wildlife doesn't file complaint forms with the Galactic Ethics Committee. The tactical display shifted, showing troop movements like a grand chess game played by gods with anger management issues. Sauroch infiltrators would use their natural camouflage to establish a perimeter, invisible until they struck. Chitauri swarms would create a living net, their numbers turning the forest floor into a carpet of clicking death. And Facet Prime's sensor abilities would track every heartbeat, every breath, every nervous twitch within a 5-kilometer radius. The human walked right into our web, Thexandra continued, her satisfaction evident in every syllable. Our intelligence reports indicate he's been holed up in the forest's center for 3 days, probably eating bugs and drinking rainwater like the primitive mammal he is. His supply drops were intercepted, his communication array was jammed, and his only escape routes lead directly into our kill zones. What the general didn't know, what none of them knew, was that their primitive mammal had spent the first 18 years of his life in the Amazon rainforest, watching his botanist parents catalog every plant, every symbiotic relationship, every delicate balance that kept one of Earth's most complex ecosystems functioning. Carter Dane didn't see the Thornwick Forest as a prison. He saw it as home. 3 kilometers away, Carter was having what could generously be called a strategic planning session with a tree. Specifically, he was explaining to a particularly cooperative specimen of Thornwick giant why rearranging its lower branches would create what military tacticians call an advantageous defensive position, and what Carter preferred to think of as a really good place to watch the fireworks. "See, the thing about your average galactic military force," he said, threading a length of vine through a carefully calculated series of branch joints, "is that they think in straight lines. Point A to point B, overwhelming force, shock and awe, problem solved." He tested the tension on his improvised pulley system and nodded approvingly. "But you and I both know that nature doesn't do straight lines, doesn't she, old girl?" The tree, being a tree, offered no verbal response, but the way its branches swayed in the still air suggested either agreement or a concerning development in local plant evolution. Carter had been busy during his 3 days of supposed hiding. The surveillance drones that thought they were tracking his movements had been carefully captured, reprogrammed, and turned into what he cheerfully referred to as his flying assistants. The communication jammers that were supposed to isolate him had become the backbone of his own private network, and those supply drops that had been intercepted, well, Carter had always preferred shopping local anyway. The Thornwick Forest provided everything a resourceful human might need. Explosive tree sap that made his grandmother's cherry bombs look like party favors, mineral deposits that could be refined into compounds that would give a chemistry professor nightmares, and a delightfully cooperative ecosystem that seemed to understand the concept of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. "Now, I know what you're thinking." Carter continued his one-sided conversation while securing what looked like an ordinary branch, but was actually a carefully disguised trigger mechanism. "Carter, old boy, you're talking to a tree. That's either a sign of brilliant tactical planning or impending mental breakdown." He paused to consider this. "Let's go with brilliant tactical planning. It sounds better in the after-action reports." The forest around him hummed with activity that had nothing to do with alien invasion forces and everything to do with a complex web of natural partnerships that Carter had spent 3 days carefully negotiating. The carnivorous plants had been convinced to redirect their appetites toward more metallic prey. The burrowing creatures had agreed to some strategic excavation work in exchange for protection from aerial predators, and the trees themselves had proven surprisingly amenable to a little creative landscaping. "The beautiful thing about ecosystems," Carter explained to his wooden confidant while making final adjustments to his handiwork, "is that they're already perfectly designed killing machines. They just need someone with the right perspective to help them realize their full potential." General Thexandra would have been deeply disturbed to learn that her perfect kill zone was about to become a demonstration of why humans had survived ice ages, asteroid impacts, and reality television. But then again, Thexandra was thinking like a civilized being, and there was absolutely nothing civilized about what Carter Dane had planned for his uninvited guests. The sun was setting through the Thornwick canopy, casting everything in shades of green and gold that would have been beautiful if they hadn't been about to become the backdrop for what military historians would later describe as a textbook example of why you should never underestimate a human with too much time and access to garden supplies. Carter checked his watch, a quaint mechanical device that couldn't be jammed, hacked, or traced, and smiled. Right about now, the Sauroch Advance Scouts would be moving into position, their camouflage systems working overtime to blend with the local flora. The Chitauri swarms would be establishing their perimeter, confident that their numbers could overwhelm any single opponent. And Facet Prime would be extending their sensor network, mapping every living thing in the forest with crystalline precision. "Well, gang," Carter said to the trees, the vines, the probably carnivorous flowers, and the definitely interested wildlife. "Showtime's in about 6 hours. I hope you're all ready to meet some new friends." The forest rustled in response, And if Carter didn't know better, he'd swear it sounded like laughter. Dawn broke over the Thornwick forest like a reluctant witness to what was about to become the galaxy's most embarrassing military operation. General Thexandra watched from her command bunker as her carefully orchestrated ambush reached its crescendo, energy weapons lighting up the pre-dawn darkness like the galaxy's most expensive fireworks display. "All units converge on target coordinates," she commanded, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone about to close the most frustrating chapter of her military career. "Maximum firepower. I want that position sterilized." The forest erupted in brilliant flashes of plasma and particle beam fire. Ancient trees that had stood for centuries were reduced to glowing stumps in seconds. The ground itself seemed to boil under the concentrated assault. Smoke rose in thick columns that should have contained the scattered remains of one very unlucky human demolitions expert. Should have. When the smoke cleared and the energy dissipated, the scanners showed exactly what General Thexandra had expected. A crater where Carter Dane used to be, still glowing from the thermal assault. Victory was confirmed, the threat eliminated, and the galaxy could return to its regularly scheduled program of orderly civilization. "Confirmation on target elimination?" she asked, though the question was purely procedural. Nothing could have survived that bombardment. Histalk's voice crackled over the communication system, confusion evident even through the electronic distortion. "General, the heat signatures are inconsistent. The target zone shows complete destruction, but I'm reading, 'This doesn't make sense.' Explain. The human's trail just stops. Not destroyed, not scattered. It's as if he simply ceased to exist 3 meters before reaching the impact zone." Thexandra frowned. Sauroch trackers didn't make mistakes about trails. Their thermal sensing could follow a footprint through a volcanic eruption. "Equipment malfunction?" "Negative, General. All systems are functioning within normal parameters. But according to my readings, your target was never in that position when we fired." Before Thexandra could process this impossible information, a cheerful human voice echoed through the forest, carried by speakers that definitely hadn't been there yesterday. "Good morning, campers." Carter's voice was disgustingly upbeat for someone who should have been reduced to component atoms. "I hope everyone enjoyed the light show. Very impressive. Really top-notch destruction of that lovely clearing I spent so much time decorating for you." The assembled alien forces froze. Dead humans weren't supposed to provide commentary on their own demise. "Now, I don't want to be a poor host," the voice continued conversationally, "but I couldn't help noticing that some of you have been borrowing my surveillance drones without asking. That's just rude. So I took the liberty of borrowing them back. Hope you don't mind?" Suddenly, every screen in the command bunker flickered. The tactical displays that should have been showing friendly force positions instead began displaying what appeared to be a nature documentary, complete with cheerful narration. "Here we see the lesser-spotted Sauroch in its natural habitat." Carter's voice provided educational commentary as their own drones focused on increasingly uncomfortable close-ups of camouflaged alien soldiers. "Notice how its advanced camouflage systems create a beautiful rainbow effect when exposed to the right electromagnetic frequencies. Absolutely stunning." As if on cue, the invisible Sauroch infiltrators suddenly became very visible indeed, their camouflage systems glitching into a kaleidoscope of colors that would have been pretty if they hadn't completely destroyed the point of being camouflaged. Buswick's mandibles clicked frantically as he tried to re-establish control of his swarm networks. "General, we have a problem. My soldiers are reporting system-wide communication failures, and..." He paused, confusion evident in his insectoid features. "Several of my advanced scouts have gone dark. Not destroyed, just missing." "Missing how?" "Their locator beacons simply stopped transmitting. No distress signals, no combat indicators, no biological failure warnings. They just aren't there anymore." Carter's voice returned, now with the tone of someone giving a guided tour to particularly slow tourists. "And over here, we have a magnificent example of Chitauri tactical doctrine in action. Watch as these remarkable insects demonstrate their famous swarm coordination by running around in small circles looking for soldiers who definitely used to be here just a minute ago. The drone footage switched to aerial views of Chitauri forces moving in increasingly frantic patterns, searching for squad members who had apparently vanished into thin air. Their sophisticated tracking systems showed empty space where armed soldiers should have been standing. "You know," Carter continued thoughtfully, "I've always wondered what would happen if you took a hive mind species and introduced a little chaos into their information network. Turns out, they get really confused, really fast. Educational. Facet primes, crystalline form pulsed with agitated energy patterns. General, my sensor readings are unprecedented. I'm detecting multiple human heartbeats in locations that should be impossible. Underground, in the canopy, somehow integrated with the forest's own biological rhythms. It's as if the entire ecosystem has learned to mask human biosignatures. That's impossible. I'm also detecting structural modifications to the forest itself. The tree formations have been altered, creating what appears to be a three-dimensional maze with integrated camouflage and concealment systems. This level of environmental engineering should have taken months to accomplish." Carter's voice took on the tone of a proud parent showing off their child's art project. "Oh, you noticed. I was hoping someone would appreciate the craftsmanship. You see, most people think of trees as just big wooden posts, but they're actually incredible engineering marvels. Load-bearing branches, natural pulley systems, organic elevator networks. Once you understand how they work, it's amazing what you can accomplish with a little creative pruning." As if to demonstrate, several missing Chitauri soldiers suddenly dropped from the canopy, suspended in what appeared to be naturally occurring vine cocoons. They were alive, conscious, and extremely indignant, but thoroughly immobilized by plant life that seemed to have developed very specific opinions about uninvited guests. "Don't worry," Carter called out cheerfully. "They're just in time out. The vines are actually quite comfortable once you stop struggling. Very therapeutic, really. I call it aggressive botanical meditation." General Thexandra felt the first cold touch of genuine concern. This wasn't going according to any tactical manual she'd ever studied. "All units, fall back to secondary positions, establish defensive perimeter, and await further orders." "Oh, I'm afraid that might be a problem." Carter's voice carried genuine regret now. "You see, while you were all focused on that lovely fireworks display, I took the liberty of doing a little landscaping. Nothing major, just rearranged some branches, relocated a few boulders, convinced some of the local flora to be a bit more interactive with visitors." The drone feed switched to show what had been clear forest paths just hours earlier. Now, the routes between alien positions had become navigational nightmares. Fallen trees that hadn't been there before blocked what should have been simple movements, and the ground itself seemed to have developed an unhealthy interest in swallowing boots, weapons, and the occasional entire soldier. "The beautiful thing about working with nature," Carter explained conversationally, "is that it's already spent millions of years figuring out the most efficient ways to trap, process, and recycle organic matter. I just provided a little strategic direction." A Sorok squad leader's voice crackled over the communication system, panic barely contained. "General, we need immediate extraction. The branches are moving on their own. They're herding us toward some kind of pit system." "That would be the organic traffic management system," Carter provided helpfully. "I know it seems aggressive, but trust me, you really don't want to take the alternate routes. The flowers on those paths get very cranky when disturbed, and they have absolutely terrible table manners." Buswick's compound eyes reflected the growing chaos as more of his soldiers found themselves relocated to what Carter cheerfully referred to as nature's own guest rooms, hollows in ancient trees that had been modified into perfectly comfortable, perfectly inescapable holding cells. "This is impossible," Thexandra muttered, watching her perfectly planned operation dissolve into botanical comedy. "He's one human with access to sticks and rocks." Actually, Carter's voice carried the tone of someone correcting a minor but important detail. I prefer to think of it as having access to several million years of evolutionary engineering, a few basic principles of applied physics, and what my old chemistry teacher used to call an unhealthy enthusiasm for cause and effect relationships. The truth was beginning to dawn on the assembled alien forces. They hadn't walked into a trap. They'd walked into a classroom, and Carter Dane was about to teach them a very expensive lesson about the difference between advanced technology and applied intelligence. "Class is now in session," Carter announced, his voice echoing from speakers hidden throughout what had once been their perfect kill zone. "Today's subject: why you should never underestimate a human who's had 3 days to redecorate the neighborhood." In her command bunker, General Thexandra stared at the tactical displays showing her forces being systematically collected, catalogued, and stored like specimens in the galaxy's most embarrassing natural history museum. For the first time in her distinguished military career, she was beginning to suspect that she might have made a very serious tactical error. The forest rustled around them, and it definitely sounded like laughter. General Thexandra's claws scraped against the command console as she activated the emergency beacon. This had gone far beyond a simple containment operation. It had become a humiliation that would echo through military academies for generations. "Orbital Command, this is Ground Force Alpha. Request immediate backup and heavy support. We have a situation." The response crackled through static that shouldn't have existed on military-grade communication systems. "Ground Force Alpha, this is Orbital Command. We're reading your position, but we're experiencing some technical difficulties up here. Several of our perimeter ships have gone dark." Define gone dark. "Not destroyed, General, just offline. Crews report system-wide malfunctions, then communications cut out. Engineering teams are baffled. It's as if someone uploaded a virus that convinced their ships to take a nap." Thexandra felt her blood temperature drop several degrees. "How many ships?" "6 so far. The crews are alive and unharmed, but their vessels are completely non-responsive. We're tracking them on backup sensors, but they're just drifting." Carter's voice returned to the forest's communication system, now carrying a distinctly apologetic tone. "Sorry about your space friends, General. But I should probably mention that I wasn't exactly alone down here. I mean, I know your intelligence report suggested I was a solo act, but that was kind of the point of the whole exercise." The tactical displays flickered again, now showing footage that definitely hadn't been captured by coalition drones. The perspective was too steady, too professional, too much like actual military reconnaissance. "You see," Carter continued conversationally, "Earth's been very interested in testing whether our particular brand of creative problem-solving could work against, well, overwhelming technological superiority. And you folks volunteered to be our test subjects. Isn't that thoughtful?" A new voice joined the broadcast. Male, with the crisp diction of someone who'd spent years coordinating urban warfare operations. "Carter, stop gloating and show them the underground network. They look confused." "Right. Sorry. Everyone meet Gabe Torres. He's been having an absolutely wonderful time exploring your sensor blind spots. Gabe, tell them about your submarine." The drone footage switched to underwater cameras, showing what appeared to be a naturally formed river system beneath the forest floor. Except the natural tunnels had been modified with air pockets, equipment caches, and what looked suspiciously like docking stations for human-sized vehicles. "The Thornwick root system extends about 15 meters underground," Gabe's voice explained with the patience of a nature documentary narrator. "Most of it's been hollowed out by centuries of root growth and underground water flow. Very convenient for anyone who doesn't mind getting their boots wet and has a basic understanding of aquatic navigation." As if to prove his point, several more missing alien soldiers were delivered to the surface by what appeared to be an organic conveyor system. Root networks that had been convinced to transport unconscious Chitauri-like packages in the galaxy's strangest mail system. "The beautiful thing about underground rivers," Gabe continued, "is that your orbital sensors can't track them. Your ground-based equipment can't penetrate them. And they connect to places you'd never think to look, like, say, the landing bays of parked starships. Thexandra's tactical mind finally grasped the full scope of what had happened. You didn't just prepare the forest, you've been infiltrating our ships. Infiltrating is such an aggressive word, Carter said. We prefer conducting unauthorized maintenance. Your crews are fine, by the way. Just taking a well-deserved rest while we fixed a few software issues they didn't know they had. A third voice joined the conversation, female, with the kind of calm precision that made seasoned soldiers nervous. Carter, Gabe, you're being dramatic again. Let me handle the technical explanation. And that's Iris Blackthorne, Carter announced proudly. Former sniper, current expert in what she calls organic ballistics. Iris, show them your trees. The camera feed switched to views of the forest canopy that revealed what trained eyes should have noticed immediately. Several of the larger trees had been modified. Not obviously, not in ways that would show up on standard reconnaissance, but with subtle alterations that turned them into natural weapon platforms. Conventional sniper positions rely on artificial concealment and elevation. Iris's voice explained with academic precision. But if you understand how trees actually grow, you can convince them to create perfect firing positions as part of their natural development. No metal signatures, no artificial heat sources, no geometric patterns that stand out to sensor sweeps. To demonstrate her point, several energy blasts emerged from trees that hadn't been there moments before, precisely targeting the remaining functional communication equipment of the scattered alien forces. The shots came from positions that thermal imaging showed as nothing but ordinary branches and leaves. The trees don't just provide concealment, Iris continued. Certain varieties of thornwick timber have acoustic properties that function as natural sound suppressors. Others have electromagnetic characteristics that scatter sensor sweeps. It's really quite elegant once you understand the principles involved. Buzzwick's remaining forces found themselves dealing with an increasingly impossible tactical situation. Their enemies were everywhere and nowhere, striking from positions that sensors insisted were empty, using weapons that shouldn't exist, and coordinating through communication systems that had been turned into elaborate practical jokes. "This is impossible," Buzzwick clicked frantically. 3 humans cannot coordinate this level of tactical complexity." "Oh, we're not coordinating anything," Carter replied cheerfully. "We're just participating in a conversation that the forest started a few million years ago. You know, predator, prey, adaptation, survival. The usual." Gabe's voice added the kind of detail that made military strategists wake up in cold sweats. The thing about ecosystems is that they're already perfect information networks. Every plant, every animal, every microorganism is constantly communicating about threats, opportunities, and changes in local conditions. We just learned the language. Which brings us to the real lesson here. Iris's voice carried the tone of a professor delivering a final exam question. You came here thinking you were fighting 3 humans with limited resources. But you're actually fighting an entire ecosystem that's been optimized for warfare by several million years of evolutionary pressure. We're just the consultants. The forest around them seemed to pulse with predatory awareness. Plants that had appeared decorative revealed defensive capabilities that belonged in military engineering manuals. Animals that should have fled from the first energy discharge instead began displaying coordinated pack behaviors that suggested very specific training. "Every vine that's holding your soldiers," Carter explained, "every root system that's redirecting your movement, every tree that's providing our firing positions, they're all part of the same network. And that network has been learning about your capabilities, your weaknesses, and your tactical preferences for 3 days." Thexandra realized with growing horror that her perfect kill zone had become something far worse than a trap. It had become a testing ground where humans were field testing their ability to turn entire worlds into weapons. "The really beautiful part," Gabe added with obvious satisfaction, "is that this whole operation only required basic tools, local materials, and an understanding of principles that Earth figured out before we ever left our home system. No advanced technology, no exotic materials, no weapons that violate galactic warfare conventions. Just humans being humans, Iris concluded. Creative, adaptable, and absolutely terrible at following the rules that more civilized species take for granted. Carter's voice returned with the tone of someone wrapping up a successful presentation. So, General Thexandra, I think it's time we discuss terms for your withdrawal. Your soldiers are all safe and healthy. Your ships are getting some much-needed maintenance, and you've gathered enough data to write some very interesting reports about human tactical capabilities. But first, he added with unmistakable satisfaction, I think you should know that this forest isn't the only place where humans have been doing some creative landscaping. Earth's been very busy lately, and we've made some fascinating new friends among the galaxy's more overlooked ecosystems. The implications hit Thexandra like a plasma charge to the face. If humans could do this to one forest, with basic tools and 3 days of preparation, what could they accomplish with months, years, or entire planetary systems? The answer, she realized with the kind of clarity that comes right before career-ending tactical disasters, was probably something that would fundamentally change how the galaxy thought about warfare, humans, and the very dangerous intersection of the two. But Carter wasn't finished with his educational presentation. Now, I know what you're all thinking. His voice carried the insufferable cheerfulness of someone who was genuinely enjoying himself. Carter, old boy, this is all very impressive, but surely there must be some limit to what 3 humans can accomplish with garden supplies and bad attitudes. The forest around them began to shift in ways that defied both physics and common sense. Trees that had stood motionless for hours suddenly revealed themselves to be mobile, not walking exactly, but repositioning themselves through root systems that had been modified into organic hydraulic networks. What the aliens had mapped as static terrain was actually a dynamic battlefield that could reconfigure itself in real time. See, the thing about humans, Gabe's voice added from somewhere in the canopy, is that we've never been particularly good at accepting limitations. When someone tells us something's impossible, we tend to take that as a personal challenge. Facet Prime's crystalline form pulsed with increasingly frantic energy patterns as their sensor readings became completely unreliable. General, the electromagnetic signatures are shifting constantly. It's as if the entire forest has become a single, massive organism with distributed intelligence. That's because it has, Iris replied matter-of-factly. Mycorrhizal networks, fungal connections between tree root systems, create natural information highways that span entire continents. We just taught them some new protocols. To demonstrate this point, the forest floor began revealing a complex network of bioluminescent fungi that pulsed in coordinated patterns. The lights traced paths between every tree, every bush, every patch of seemingly empty ground, creating a living circuit board that stretched beyond the horizon. Each pulse carries tactical information, Carter explained with obvious pride. Troop movements, equipment status, environmental changes. The whole forest is basically one enormous sensor array with a very specific interest in uninvited guests. Hisstock's voice crackled through the communication system, terror barely contained behind professional training. General, my remaining scouts report that the trees are communicating with each other. About us. They're sharing information about our positions, our equipment, our tactical capabilities. Oh, they've been doing that since you arrived, Carter said conversationally. We just gave them a vocabulary for discussing military strategy. Turns out plants are surprisingly quick learners when it comes to identifying threats to their ecosystem. The bioluminescent network suddenly flared brighter, and the remaining alien forces found themselves subjected to what could only be described as organic psychological warfare. The trees began producing sounds, not the random creaking of wood under stress, but coordinated acoustic patterns that seemed designed to create maximum discomfort in non-human nervous systems. Psychological operations through environmental manipulation, Gabe explained helpfully. Every species has different stress responses to audio frequencies, electromagnetic fields, and chemical signatures. The forest has been analyzing your biological data and customizing its output for maximum effectiveness. Buzzwick's remaining soldiers began exhibiting signs of acute distress as the trees around them produced specific subsonic frequencies that triggered panic responses in Chitauri nervous systems. The Sauroch forces found themselves dealing with visual disruption, patterns that confused their thermal imaging capabilities. Even Facet Prime's crystalline structure began resonating uncomfortably with targeted electromagnetic pulses. "This is biological warfare," Thexandra protested, though she knew even as she said it that no galactic convention had ever anticipated this level of creative interpretation. "This is ecological self-defense," Iris corrected. "The forest is protecting itself from invasive species using perfectly natural responses that have been slightly enhanced through collaborative optimization. Besides," Carter added cheerfully, "we're not using any artificial weapons, toxic chemicals, or restricted technologies. We're just helping local wildlife express its opinions about territorial violations." As if summoned by his words, the forest's actual animal inhabitants began to make their presence known. What had seemed like a normal woodland ecosystem revealed itself to be a carefully organized militia of creatures that had apparently attended the same tactical briefing as the trees. Birds that had been silent throughout the entire operation suddenly erupted into coordinated dive-bombing runs, targeting communication equipment with precision that suggested advanced training. Small mammals emerged from hidden burrows to systematically disable abandoned weapons and equipment. Even the insects seemed to be following specific operational protocols. 3 months of cross-species diplomatic negotiations, Gabe explained, as a pack of what appeared to be ordinary forest wolves began herding confused alien soldiers toward predetermined collection points. Turns out, most animals are perfectly willing to participate in home defense operations if you approach the subject with proper respect and adequate compensation. "Compensation?" Thexandra asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "Pest control services," Carter replied. "We've been helping them deal with some invasive species problems they've been having. Very satisfying work, really. Mutually beneficial arrangements between intelligent species working toward common goals." The tactical situation had moved so far beyond conventional warfare that Thexandra's military training provided no relevant guidance. Her forces were being systematically collected by an alliance of humans, plants, animals, and what appeared to be the occasional mineral formation that had developed strong opinions about trespassing. "This level of environmental integration should be impossible," she muttered, watching her supposedly superior technological forces being outmaneuvered by a coalition that included talking trees and politically active wildlife. "Should be, could be, would be." Carter's voice carried the satisfaction of someone who had just proven a very important point. "But here's the thing about humans, General. We've never been particularly impressed by what other people think should be possible. We tend to focus more on what actually works." Part 4. The Reckoning General. Thexandra had reached the kind of desperation that made seasoned military commanders consider career changes in agricultural management. Her forces were scattered, her equipment was compromised, her ships were taking unauthorized naps in orbit, and she was receiving tactical advice from trees that had apparently graduated from advanced military academies. "All remaining units," she commanded through gritted teeth, "initiate scorched earth protocols. If we can't contain the humans, we eliminate the battlefield itself." The order crackled through what remained of her communication network, reaching the scattered fragments of alien forces who were still capable of following orders. Energy weapons began charging for wide-area bombardment. Incendiary devices armed themselves, and orbital platforms that hadn't been maintenance-napped by human infiltrators began targeting the forest for complete sterilization. "You want to play games with garden warfare?" Thexandra snarled at the forest in general. "Let's see how your precious ecosystem handles systematic incineration." Carter's voice returned to the communication system, but the cheerful tour guide tone had been replaced by something that made hardened soldiers check their life insurance policies. "General, I really wouldn't recommend that particular course of action." "And why not, human?" "Well, for starters, you'd be doing exactly what we hoped you'd do. See, Controlled burns are actually a natural part of forest ecosystem management. Very healthy for the local flora, encourages new growth, clears out dead undergrowth. His voice carried the ominous satisfaction of someone explaining why their opponent had just walked into the final phase of an elaborate trap. The first incendiary charges detonated across the forest's perimeter, sending columns of flame racing through the underbrush. For a brief, glorious moment, General Thexandra felt the satisfaction of watching human cleverness succumb to superior firepower. Then the forest began to fight back. The flames that should have spread randomly instead began moving in coordinated patterns, following what appeared to be predetermined channels that directed the fire exactly where the humans wanted it to go. Trees that should have been consumed by the blaze instead seemed to be conducting it, using the thermal energy to power some kind of organic machinery that had been hidden within their root systems. See, the beautiful thing about working with fire, Carter explained conversationally as the forest around them transformed into something that belonged in the fever dreams of military engineers, is that it's just another tool if you understand the principles involved. Controlled burns, thermal updrafts, pressure differentials, very useful for powering certain kinds of organic hydraulic systems. The burning trees began to move, not slowly, not awkwardly, but with the fluid grace of mechanisms that had been designed specifically for this moment. Ancient trunks that had stood motionless for centuries revealed themselves to be components in a massive organic machine that spanned the entire forest. "Gabe, show them the underground network's fire management system," Carter suggested helpfully. The drone feeds switched to underground cameras showing the root system in full operation. The controlled burns weren't destroying the forest. They were powering it. The thermal energy was being channeled through modified root networks to drive pumps, generators, and what appeared to be a sophisticated hydraulic system that was launching something large and numerous toward the alien positions. Pressure-driven botanical artillery, Gabe's voice explained with obvious professional appreciation. The fire provides the thermal energy, the root system converts it to hydraulic pressure, and the trees launch whatever we've loaded into their natural seed dispersal mechanisms. What the trees were launching turned out to be the forest's equivalent of care packages, perfectly preserved, completely immobilized alien soldiers who had been stored in organic pods and were now being delivered back to their units via high-velocity plant-based ballistics. "Express delivery service," Carter announced proudly. "We figured you'd want your people back, so we developed a rapid deployment system. Don't worry, the pods are padded with the finest locally sourced moss, very comfortable during flight." The pods impacted around the remaining alien positions with organic thuds, splitting open to release extremely confused but unharmed soldiers who had been treated to what Carter cheerfully described as mandatory nature education seminars during their captivity. But the real surprise came from above. The thermal updrafts created by the controlled burns were powering something that defied both tactical doctrine and several fundamental principles of aerodynamics. The forest canopy had been configured into a series of organic gliders, living aircraft that used the fire's thermal energy to achieve sustained flight. "Iris, tell them about your flying trees," Carter suggested. "Biomechanical aviation through thermal manipulation." Iris's voice carried the tone of someone presenting groundbreaking research. Certain tree species have natural wing-like branch configurations that can be enhanced through selective pruning and structural modification. Add controlled thermal updrafts, and you get sustainable organic aircraft with integrated weapon systems. The flying trees began conducting what could only be described as an aerial ballet of destruction, systematically disabling the remaining heavy weapons and communication equipment with precision strikes that came from directions that aerospace engineers insisted were impossible. "This is impossible!" Buzzwick's voice cracked across the communication system. "Trees do not fly. Forests do not conduct combined arms operations. Plants do not coordinate air-ground naval assaults." "Well, they do now," Carter replied cheerfully. "That's the wonderful thing about human engineering. We don't let traditional limitations get in the way of creative solutions." General Thexandra watched her scorched earth strategy transform into the final movement of what was clearly a very elaborate symphony of military humiliation. The forest wasn't being destroyed by fire. It was being powered by it, using the thermal energy to coordinate the most sophisticated biological warfare operation in galactic history. How? She asked, though she was no longer sure she wanted to know the answer. 3 months of intensive ecological negotiation, Gabe's voice explained. Turns out, if you approach forest management with proper respect for natural systems and a basic understanding of thermodynamics, you can accomplish some very interesting things. Plus, Carter added, we had excellent motivational material. The local ecosystem was already pretty annoyed about previous military operations in their neighborhood. We just provided some technical consulting on how to express their displeasure more effectively. The final phase of the operation began as the fires died down, revealing that the forest had been completely restructured during the controlled burn. What had been a natural woodland was now clearly an integrated biological fortress with defensive positions, transportation networks, and what appeared to be manufacturing facilities, all grown from modified plant life. Ladies and gentlemen, Carter announced with the satisfaction of someone completing a successful demonstration, I present the galaxy's first fully operational biomechanical military installation, powered by renewable energy, staffed by local volunteers, and absolutely guaranteed to make your next planetary invasion a very educational experience. Thexandra realized that she was no longer looking at a military defeat. She was witnessing the birth of an entirely new form of warfare. If humans could do this to one forest, with 3 people and basic tools, what could they accomplish with entire worlds and proper resources? The really beautiful part, Iris added, is that this whole operation used only materials that were already present in the local ecosystem. No imported technology, no exotic materials, no weapon systems that violate any galactic warfare conventions. Just humans helping nature achieve its full potential. Speaking of which, Carter's voice took on the tone of someone offering genuine hospitality. Your ships should be coming back online about now. Our engineering teams finished their maintenance work and installed some upgrades that should improve your fuel efficiency by about 15%. Consider it a thank you gift for participating in our field test. True to his word, the communication systems began receiving signals from the orbital platforms. The ship crews reported that their vessels were indeed functional, again, with several mysterious improvements to their navigation and life support systems that made everything run more smoothly than before. Field test? Thexandra asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Earth's been very curious about whether our particular approach to problem-solving could scale up to galactic-level challenges, Carter explained. You folks provided an excellent opportunity to test our theories about environmental warfare, cross-species cooperation, and the tactical applications of applied ecology. This entire operation was an experiment? More like a proof of concept, Gabe corrected. The real experiments are happening on about 30 other worlds where human agricultural consultants have been helping local ecosystems with various infrastructure improvements. The implications hit Thexandra like a collapsing star. If this was just a test, and if humans were already implementing these techniques across multiple worlds, then the galaxy's entire approach to military strategy had just become obsolete. So, Carter's voice carried the tone of someone wrapping up a successful business meeting. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to take your people, your ships, and your very interesting tactical data back to whatever committee makes decisions about human relations. You're going to tell them that Earth would very much like to discuss some new paradigms for interspecies cooperation. And if we refuse, well, Carter replied with the kind of cheerfulness that made smart people very nervous, you're welcome to try that. But I should mention that the trees have gotten very fond of their new friends, and they're already discussing expansion plans with some neighboring forests. Plus, the local wildlife has started a very enthusiastic word-of-mouth campaign about the benefits of interspecies tactical cooperation. As if to emphasize his point, the forest around them rustled with what sounded suspiciously like applause from several thousand very satisfied plants and animals who had just discovered the joys of organized warfare. Your choice, General, Carter concluded. But I'd recommend the diplomacy option. It's much more comfortable than finding out what a really motivated ecosystem can accomplish when it puts its mind to conquest. In the end, General Thexandra chose diplomacy. It seemed like the safer option when the alternative involved explaining to her superiors why she'd been defeated by a coalition of humans, trees, and politically active forest creatures who had developed strong opinions about galactic military doctrine. The galaxy, she realized, was about to become a much more interesting place.